Hey everybody, this is Kyla here from Waveflow, the mindfulness practice that creates ripples of acceptance, meaning, and appreciation in your life. This season, we're hosting a series of interviews with founders, entrepreneurs, and small business owners to hear how they got started and have kept up a practice of sticking with the intentions they've set for themselves. And next up is Barrett. I got to know Barrett through the squash world. He played in college at Bowdoin with my husband, Andrew. And since then, we've been thrilled to cheer him on as he opened Portland Community Squash in Maine, an awesome squash community center. And it's unique because Barrett's really brought together people from truly all walks of life and created access to squash for families who might not have normally ever tried the sport at all, in addition to hosting a variety of after-school programs and other social programs to create community and bring people together. What I love about what Barrett's team has done is that they offer resources readily available on their website so that other future founders can take advantage of their learnings for how to build a successful community squash center, or as they say, community anything center, with repeatable and deep dive process charts, as well as a theory of change that organizations can use as a playbook and a scorecard for intentional growth. Barrett has quite literally created a community center that bridges the gap for various cultural groups through a variety of mediums, such as squash, yoga, a gym, fitness center, academic support, leadership coaching, a cafe, and a co-working space too. From the outside, what he's followed through on creating is incredible, and I was excited to catch up to him and hear what he's been up to most recently, and also learn from his perspective what's been exciting and what's felt like a grind. So if you're inspired by what Barrett shared here, I encourage you to head to their website. I'll drop it in the notes. It's a 501c3 organization, so you're welcome to donate and support or go visit for yourself if you're in the Portland, Maine area. And if what Barrett's done has struck you at all, I invite and heavily encourage you to try on a structured intention setting process of your own. Grab a copy of Waveflow's intention setting workbook, North Star, and discover what could come to fruition in your life through a month-long commitment to a custom, curated intention. Okay, let's hear from Barrett from Portland Community Squash. Barrett, it's so good to see you. Thank you so much for hopping on. I can't wait to get into it, to hear your perspective on the background of this project, how this all started. So could you talk first a little bit about your start in the squash world and then also the inception of Portland Community Squash?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Kyle, we've been friends for a long time, and Andrew in your household was my sparring partner in college, and I still feel sore and out of breath thinking about training with that super athlete every day at Bowdoin. But right after Bowdoin, probably everyone following Andrew, everybody got into finance, and I went down to Portland, Maine. I chose a city, looking for lifestyle, and from, humble roots in the cubicle at an insurance company, I got out and started working with youth in Portland, Maine, and just found a bit of a discouraging dearth of opportunities for kids in the city. So I took it upon myself to start an after-school program at the local YMCA. I got involved with Big Brother, Big Sister. I got involved with the Boys and Girls Club. And ultimately, this side project, side hustle, passion that I was developing turned out to be my full-time gig. We got the program to 200 kids. We were playing squash on a couple old converted racquetball courts underneath the pool. We had a boom box that was blasting hip hop every day after school. And I think just, the fact that I was 22, it was a bit unstructured, it was probably a bit unsafe, and the music was loud, led a ton of kids from the local schools getting involved, so much so that we went on to purchase a former Orthodox synagogue that was planned and scheduled to be demolished, and we turned it into community center with squash courts and yoga studios and a cafe, locker rooms, the whole 9 yards. And we just passed 1,000 members. We've had 700 kids go through the youth programs, and we're working on building uh, a new take on the American Community Center, both here and with partners all across the country. So
Oh,
that's
oh, whoa, whoa. All right. Take me
yeah.
back. Take me back. So I know I have some people who tune into the podcast who live in California. If you have no idea what we're talking about, squash is this awesome, heavily concentrated in the East Coast sport where you play it in a white room. Yes, it looks similar to a racquetball court. No, it's not the same exact sport as that. And it's fantastic, especially on the East Coast when it's cold in the winter, for getting the body moving in a small amount of space. It's a highly athletic game. It's a fun game. It's a competitive game. And Barrett and I have in common that we were both able to play a little bit growing up and in college. And then it sounds like, okay, so take me back. So you're doing this on the side of your insurance job. I don't even think I realized this. And what was that moment like when, like, was it a natural, like, okay, I'm not really feeling this insurance thing, or like what caused you to leave the insurance situation and pursue this full time?
Yeah, and sorry for skipping ahead. I think it's good to contextualize myself. Like, who's this random squash player from Maine jumping on the San Francisco podcast? But I think I took for granted your audience knowing all about squash because squash is going to be in the Olympics in LA 2028. Shout out to the West Coast.
What?
I actually got to work on the campaign, the marketing campaign to get squash included, and had some fun. Thinking outside of the box on that project. Anyway, stories for another day. Speaking of being in boxes, yeah, I was in the cubicle. And for me, it was the first day on the job when I knew I needed to start looking for something else. I loved my coworkers so much. And honestly, just wheeling cubicle to cubicle was might as well have been my collegiate sport. I knew Mike, he was all decked out with his Patriots gear. Brenda was all about her nephews. So I definitely kind of had an extroverted, interpersonal angle that I was bringing to my underwriting career. But my first day in the office, Janelle was celebrating her 5th year, and she said to me, Barrett, it feels like I got here yesterday. And I said, Janelle, I'm getting the heck out of here. Um, I don't know what it was, but I got spooked and knew I wanted to be working underneath the sun, not underneath the roof, and I wanted to be in homes and chatting to people. And um, ultimately, what I discovered that I like to do is connect people to opportunities, relationships, and well-being, and that's what I get to do every day now. So that was that was my origin story.
Okay, so if you haven't had a chance to visit Barrett's Portland Community Squash in Portland, Maine, it's a fantastic it's a fantastic space. Could you talk to us a little bit about when you were more in the initial phases of finding the location and creating what that would come to be? How did you find it easy to get fundraising? Was that a hurdle? Like what was that like for you to actually create the physical space where you set it up?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so fortunate now that I've been doing this for a decade. I get to work with community builders all over the country that are trying to do similar projects, which is really fun. But I've come to learn that in order to build a successful place-based community center, you're building a digital-based community center with your podcast, Kyla. But if you want to be space-based, you need location, leadership, and capital. So, in the early days, I was willing to put in the sweat equity. The synagogue, I had the privilege of negotiating the sale with the entire congregation. So I'd send a number over, the entire congregation would talk about it, a number would come back. But ultimately, they were really sweet to me and gave me plenty of time to close. I signed a purchase and sale agreement with $150,000 in the bank. I needed more like 1.5 million, so I kept delaying the close to raise the money to buy the building and do the retrofit. to bring it up to code. So that was location, right? Leadership. I had great people around me from there were a couple years of just building human capital and relationships. And then the capital, geez, I mean, back then, $2 million or $1 million could really get you into the game. Now it's like 5 or 6 million just with the cost of construction. We're 20,000 square feet, which is a pretty big project. But those lining those three things up is a bit of a miracle. I mean, in terms of new builds, I've worked with 71 cities that have tried to build community centers, and only 13 of them have been successful because lining those three things up is not easy. So yeah, that was the early days. But the capital, it's really building a sales organization, and every company is a technology company, including community centers. So hours in, money out, clean workflows, building lists, delegating to people, meeting weekly until you hit those goals, just like anything else. And if you stick with anything for a decade, you're going to get pretty far. So.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I love this. So in those early days, like early days Barrett, still like figuring out this whole thing and still like creating the processes that you have in place now. What did you learn about yourself through that, like that speaks out as most resonant to you right now?
Yeah, it's so funny. Actually, I just had a moment that I had 10 years ago. And it just happened right now, actually. So 10 years ago, I was such an ADD case and I had so many things to do that I went out and I found 10 rocks in my hometown. I grew up by Acadia National Park. So I grabbed some rocks close to my hometown of Southwest Harbor, Maine, and each one had a different business function written on it. So when I was doing accounting, I had to put the accounting rock on my desk, on my computer, so that I would stick on that task until I finished the job. And then, now I got to move into development. I'd switch my rock out for my development rock. Now I got to do program design because I've got 100 kids showing up for practice later. And we're completely digital now. And one thing that makes this work possible for me is that all of these business functions are hitting our CRM at an automated cadence. So I don't have to keep anything in my head, really. I get to the office and it tells me what to do every day. So I've kind of surrendered to the machine. But I did just put 7 sticky notes at the bottom of my monitor, which is I'm very against, but it was like the rocks. I found myself in a moment again where my responsibilities were a little bit bigger than my brain, and I just had to put like those rocks on my screen just to keep an eye on all the things I need to carry right now. Because we opened our community center in 2016, but we just finished a $6 million expansion. And yeah, family visits are up 3 times what they were last year. But we have the same resources and staff we had, pre-construction. So it feels like I'm back on the startup bus. And uh, so what did I learn about myself? I've really been life hacking my own brain because I'm a visionary by nature, but I've had to become an implementer by nurture and nurturing those habits into myself. And rather than ADD medication, I just listen to jazz and hip hop on my headphones all day long. So yeah, those are if you want to get to know who I am a little bit better, that's the inside of my brain.
Okay, so you've constructed this amazing place that is what you kind of called it I think a modern community center earlier. Could you talk a little bit about like what does a modern community center mean to you? I know we in California here we talk a lot about the third place or like the creation of the third place in this highly technological world that we're in now. So what does that look like to you in the centers that you support in Portland and also in other cities too?
Yeah, and we are a third space. We just happen to have a really good theory of change that drives the interaction of every individual within our community. But to liken it to some other spaces, we did just have a brewery here in Portland that adopted our theory of change because they wanted to make their customer base and their employee pool more representative of the demographics in the city. So yeah, think of us as having a very good operating system for your third space. And what does that mean? Well, it boils down to three pillars. The first is access. So we kind of do a little study of what are the demographics and we define what diversity is in your region. You know, it might be political diversity in Wyoming or racial diversity in Brooklyn or multilingual diversity in Portland, Maine, etc. But anyway, access is about getting those demographics and building that multi-generational and multicultural group of people. And we really do that through inclusive marketing, transportation, financial aid, trying to remove the barriers that prevent people from participating in those spaces. The second goal is just because someone walks through the door doesn't mean they're going to stick. So, how do you enable someone to thrive by giving them relationships and skills that they can use while they're participating in that community? And for us, we call that the guided phase, where our staff is working directly with families. We're providing transportation to the kids. We're inviting the adults in for dinner. We have a mentor program and summer camps and all our staff are out there constantly recruiting and also teaching and empowering those families as they come in. But the traditional youth development model would be to keep a family or a student in that high touch intervention year over year over year. And usually the metric of success is college matriculation. Well, for us, it's not. It's really autonomy and sense of belonging. So once you see a participant starting to check in, not during the regular program hours where we're providing the transportation, but they're checking in on their own. They're able to articulate their next opportunity and form new relationships. They have the skills to care for their health and well-being. Well, we actually have data to track that at the individual level. And then we try to get that individual moving into a more sustainable phase of our organization, which we call the self-guided phase. And we provide social events, squash, fitness. We have a beautiful cafe and volunteering. So that second phase of the organization, it's not relying on staff, actually. People are really engaging with each other on their own, but the outcomes are the same. Rather than teaching opportunities, are people pursuing opportunities on their own, forming their own relationships, caring for their health and well-being. So we have a big academic framework that underwrites, that's a callback, our theory of change. We've got metrics at the individual level based on kind of the check-in data at the front desk and rubrics that we use. And those individual portraits roll up to organizational level KPIs. And it's actually kind of a beautiful graphic, our theory of change. As you look at the different patterns as individuals go through it and you stack those on top of each other. But one thing that was really beautiful when we were designing our model and all the technology that makes it possible behind it was that what's good for the individual is good for the community. It's this like the map of an individual reaching success is the same map of a community reaching success. And we just had one of the country's greatest thought leaders in Portland, Maine, the last 2 days. Her name's Fiona Hill. She's the US's expert on Russia. She was on the National Security Council for the US, for the UK, and has done a lot of work for Germany as well. She should be in the biggest rooms in the world, speaking to world leaders. But the UK actually just hired, and I'm sorry I'm going on a tangent here, but I'm just my whole ethos is putting the individual and the citizen at the center of all of our work, or the customer if you're working in Silicon Valley. Um, because Fiona Hill did a full evaluation of UK national defense. And the issues with UK national defense are not about buying another aircraft carrier. They're about citizens not wanting to fight for the military, about citizens not having not having good enough dental care to qualify for the military. Like they're human grassroots level Main Street issues. And PCS is built the same way. All of our work centers around the individual contributors to our community. And it just so happens that if you get that right, the community center thrives. Yeah, I'm a big fan of grassroots and local. And I've dipped my toes in working for bigger institutions or doing national level work. And I think collective impact's great, but I much prefer working with community builders on the ground.
Okay, so tell me
Uh,
about you as a founder. I love hearing that like what's good for the individual is generally tends to be what's good for like the collective organization. So when you think about like all these different rocks you're balancing as a person running this organization or sticky notes or whatever you want to call them, like what tools and techniques do you use on those days when you're like, okay, the rocks are starting to pile up here. Like how do you stay focused or like what do you do to kind of clear your own head and continue to, step forward intentionally?
yeah, it's funny because you sent me that question before we did the podcast. I feel like that's the thesis. And I'm not exactly sure what my exact techniques are. I will say I never thought, being kind of like an ADD impulsive kid, I never thought I would have the discipline to defer satisfaction for decades, both in my social life and my professional life. And I was having lunch with my sister in Boston, and she's like, "Yeah, it's you actually did it. And that takes different forms. I mean, my wife, Kamar, and I are living under the eaves in a little apartment without AC all summer because we knew we'd be able to rent our house, which would get us into a house where maybe we could have a family one day. But it's just though, I've always been willing to go to a great extent um, to not settle my goal. And actually, this I think does get into well-being. So I am willing to be the Western capitalist to my fullest extent, but I fully acknowledge that sometimes I'm going to crash. So how do I balance the rocks? Like sometimes I work, I probably work 12-hour days for 7 years straight. I didn't take a weekend for 5 years. I've only left the country once in the last decade because of this project. Um, but I worked with a meditation teacher during COVID, and we laughed together because I can be this, I need to measure everything, measure success, this, that, and the other thing. Um, and dissolving my ego or my goals is not something that I'm doing as regularly as I need to, but I take great comfort in knowing that I can always scale my ambitions back and just sit on the floor. Like I'm waiting for that. Sometimes that day comes, but that day could really come for me where I need to just sit down on the floor and like reevaluate. Um, but I'm in this reinforcing feedback loop where you just kind of grind through it, and sometimes you actually achieve your goals. And I feel like Kamar and I, we've both ended up on the floor a few times over the last 2 years, but not long enough to like come off our goals. So I'm still chasing, but I do feel like equilibrium, and people probably think I'm distorted because I've been saying 2 years for a while, but I do like truly think I'm 2 years away. And it's supposed to be the journey, not the destination. But I'm sure people, Americans in general, can relate to this sickness of like always chasing and going bigger. But if I don't know, I justify my pursuit in that all I want to be is relationship rich. having tea with families in this community, um, and feel like the people around me have the tools to fight back on the screen addiction and the isolation and kind of the social ailments that have a lot of people feeling disconnected. Um, so yeah, I've defined my scope of what I say yes to and what I say no to in hopes that I can one day get to that work-life balance, Kyla. And see my friends. I haven't seen you and Andrew for too long and all that jazz. I missed pretty much every bachelor party that came my way. Um, so yeah.
You're leaning into a meaningful purpose. So I just want to take a moment to celebrate that and acknowledge you for that
Mhm.
as much as you are quote unquote delaying gratification. What would
Mhm.
you say though to yourself, like let's call it a Barrett 2 or 3 years ago, right? Like coming out of the pandemic, maybe 4 years out from the 2 years you're out now, like what advice would you give yourself a couple years ago?
I think resilience. I don't know. We enjoyed kind of an extended period of peace, like growing up when we did in the US. And COVID really kind of was the first time I felt like the earth underneath my feet got rocked. When you live in the future pursuing a goal, you expect certain things to remain constant. But COVID interrupted that in a big way. And I didn't really have the resilience to deal with that like the things that you've worked so hard for can just be ripped away from you in 2 seconds. And if I was ever lucky enough to have kids, I kind of want to raise my kids um, expecting chaos, but enjoy having gratitude in those moments of peace. I don't want to traumatize anyone, but I feel like I was just, Barrett 4 years ago got humbled big time. Um, and but I thought I was only going to be in startup mode once. Well, COVID created another startup mode for me. And then, you know, making this doing this big expansion project to become the community center that we knew we could be has put me into it again. So yeah, resilience. But those disruptions all have a silver lining. I mean, so many innovations have come out of those disruptions for me. So, I guess I'm grateful. I'm still mad at COVID, but so be it.
It's real, right? You can be mad and grateful. Um,
Hmm.
the okay, so talk to us a little bit about if people you have such a unique model. I was able to visit the space obviously before the renovation, but a few years ago when we were in Maine. And I was honestly just I was so proud of you and so impressed that you like really this wouldn't have happened, of course, without you and your team, of course, rallying, taking initiative and like trying something, right? Doing something differently than it had been done before. So if people are kind of hearing this and getting maybe they've never heard of squash or maybe they haven't been to Portland, they're curious to learn more, where would you send them just to get more information, to learn about what you're doing? What would be the best next step?
Yeah, I mean, all of our information is at pcsquash.com. And at the bottom of About Us, we're pretty open source about how we actually do the things that we do over here. And there's no better job in the world. So I'd encourage everyone to think of themselves as a community builder in their own right and maybe you know, adapt some of the lessons we've learned into your own work. So that's where it is, and the story that we're trying to tell, and we'd love to participate with all of your listeners on is what's a rock gym in Memphis, a ballet studio in New York, and a squash club in Portland, Maine have in common. This is the next wave of American community centers. And we're 2 years away from full proof of concept, and then we've got a lot of partners that we're gonna tell a pretty big story with. We've got a great list of national thought leaders that are ready to go with us. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that transition to storytelling. I think coming up with a solution is is 5% of it, and then storytelling is kind of 95% of it to inspire other people to do the work.
Keep going, Barrett. I'm so proud of you. If you're curious, dive in pcsquash.com, learn more about the theory of change, see the impact this organization and soon to be lots more are making in their own communities. Thank you so much for carving out the time to hop off on with us. It was so good to see you.
You too.